Hello guys, welcome to another video. And this one I'm going to be talking about a build that I've been playing recently. Well, not so much a build, but a bit more of a test, a bit of an experiment to do with the unique item, the Veil of the Night. So this is a unique helmet, and in PoE 1, this helmet has been historically a bit of a meme. And in PoE 2, it's also a bit of a meme, but I would say it's a bit less of a meme. And I wanted to do a bit of a test with this item because I remember at some point, and forgive me for not remembering the exact developer or when this was said, but one of the developers said that the balance of elemental damage in Path of Exile 2 had been rebalanced across the game so that you're required to have a lower amount of resistances in general through the campaign, and then into endgame it scales up a bit more. Whereas in Path of Exile 1, if you don't have your elemental resistances capped by perhaps Act 3 or 4, you start to really feel that damage. And for the most part, I'd say that that's a true statement, because in Path of Exile 2, you really don't feel like you need to have your resistances capped immediately in the early acts. So I thought I'd do a bit of a test with the Veil of the Night. Now, this helmet has two really important modifiers. The first one is 50% increased maximum life, and the second is you have no elemental resistances. First, let's discuss the 50% increased maximum life. This is a stat which is super common in PoE 1, and in PoE 2 it's almost non-existent. There's a few notables on the entire tree that has this stat, and in very small quantities, such as 3%, and then a few of the ascendancies in the game, such as the Infernalist or the Blood Mage, have increased maximum life on the small nodes between the notables, and those I think are 4% or 3% increased maximum life. So you can barely get this stat anywhere in the game. And I think there's also one of the soul cores that comes from Ultimatum. They have 2% each on those soul cores, I think. So 50% from a single item is insane. For most builds, this is going to be a straight up 50% multiplier to your life, which is a big deal, but this helmet has another really bad modifier on it. You have no elemental resistances. Now, this is where the whole kind of meme comes in from PoE 1, because this item was significantly worse in that game, where the upside that it granted was, I think, 12 or 16% increased global defenses, which was really bad. You have no elemental resistances is a modifier which essentially removes elemental resistances from your character. It completely removes the entire mechanic of elemental resistances from your character. It doesn't just set them to 0, it entirely removes that mechanic. So any kind of modifiers that interact with elemental resistances on your character are completely ignored. Any kind of curses that monsters apply to you, they have no interaction. Any kind of penetration or anything like that has no effect. And you're just always considered to have no resistances. So you're basically considered to be on 0 resistances for all of elemental resistances all the time. Now, obviously, that is a very, very bad thing to have on your character, because whenever an elemental damage hit comes into this character, it is dealing 300% more damage to this character than it would be to a character that has 75% resistance. But regardless of that, I wanted to do a bit of a test with the Veil of the Night on a build and see what the game would feel like if I progressed through the campaign and into maps with no resistances. So, let's first do a map on this character, and I'll show you what a map looks like. This is a pretty standard Corrupting Cry build, so it's like a life stacking, strength stacking, Corrupting Cry build, which is why I've got so much strength. So I'll show you what a map looks like, and then I'll discuss the build a little bit further after that. One thing to say about maps on this build is that any modifier that would increase the amount of elemental damage that monsters are doing is absolutely terrible for this build. So modifiers that grant monsters extra damage as elemental are terrible, and any modifiers such as this one right here, the increased monster damage, that's really bad too, because that's just a straight multiplier on the amount of elemental damage that a monster's doing. And if you think about that in comparison to a normal build which has 75% resistance, you know, the effectiveness of that modifier is not quite as powerful as on this build, where we're taking all of that elemental damage because we have no mitigation against it. So that's really bad, but because this is a test, I'm basically running every single map. One thing to say about map modifiers is that this build doesn't care about a few modifiers which other builds find really scary, notably minus maximum elemental resistances and elemental penetration. Both of those modifiers do nothing because of the helmet.
Steel yourself! No challenge! You were no warrior. Siren half split you! Stay back! Don't do this! Split you! Ancestors! Die! Split you! Split you! Split you! No warrior.
Alright, so as you can see in that footage, obviously the damage of the build isn't great at the moment. I don't even have a 5 link on this build, so the Seismic Cry is pretty much just one damage link here. This is the 35% more damage coming in from Brutality. Obviously the other link is Corrupting Cry to actually create the damage in the first place. And the last link is Pin, because we're not playing Warbringer on this build, we're actually playing Titan, which means that we would need to avoid actually hitting a heavy stunned enemy. You would have noticed there on the boss of that map, the Warcry actually went on cooldown there briefly because we actually hit the boss when it was heavily stunned from the totems. But normally, while mapping, just when we're using Corrupting Cry, we can't possibly stun monsters. We actually pin them instead because of pin support. And so once I actually get a 5 link, I'll be adding Swift Affliction, which is another damage link for this build. I can also get a bit more strength on my gear too. And so during that map, you would have noticed that a few of those hits coming in, especially like the skeletons using the fireballs and the wraiths that use the lightning spells, those things were really chunking me. They were dealing like 40% of my life as damage, but interestingly, I haven't died on this build ever since equipping the helmet in Act 2, and I wanted to discuss that a little bit. To be clear, I'm under no assumption that the helmet is good. I actually think that this helmet is still a complete meme, even in PoE 2, and the real reason why I'm not dying on this build is, of course, the superior defense of permanently knocking back monsters using Seismic Cry. This is just a super strong defensive setup. Monsters barely ever even hit you in melee range with this Warcry constantly going off, and usually when a ranged monster hits you, unless that attack one-shots you, you're able to recover back up to full before that next attack even comes in, and you also have the opportunity to just reposition yourself around the monster so that that next attack doesn't even hit you. And so this is the real defense of the build, is Seismic Cry. But it's interesting that this helmet kind of allows this combination to work. You kind of have enough life that you're able to absorb some of those hits, and then anytime you do get chunked, you're able to buy enough time with the knockback to then recover your life back up to full. Now, in this build right now, I currently have maybe 10 to 15 exalts of gear. I really don't have very much currency in this league because I had to do a complete fresh start since you cannot migrate at the moment from seller self-found to trade, and this was like a bit of an experiment build that I wanted to run. And so the interesting thing about using the Veil of the Night is that all of your gear can essentially be focused on stacking life and scaling strength, and that's basically all I've got on all of my gear. The only other modifier that I've gone for is rarity, because obviously rarity is quite powerful at the moment. But you'll notice that every piece of gear that I have is basically just attributes, life, and a bit of rarity, if I can fit it into the build. Maybe some chaos resistance. So we've got some life here and strength, bit of chaos resistance, some regen. This one's just got life and rarity and strength. Same here, more life, movement speed, of course, strength. And except for the shield, all of the runes are life. I just added some regen here, but yeah, it's all just max life scaling and strength scaling pretty much. And over on the passive tree, it's a fairly standard setup for kind of a Corrupting Cry build. We've got the weapon swap tech going on with our main setup has Warcries going on, so we have some Warcry area effect scaling and Warcry speed and cooldown, things like that. As I said, cooldown is actually somewhat important for this build because you would occasionally hit a heavily stunned monster. For example, when you're killing a rare mob, you may drop your totems, and your totems deal enough damage to the point where they're actually heavy stunning the monster. Then you hit that monster with one of the Warcries, and the Warcry then goes on cooldown, which means that cooldown recovery rate is actually somewhat useful for that. I think my Warcry has about a 3.5 second cooldown right now, so even when it does go off, it's not the end of the world. We can just get back to using it quite shortly after that. And these are mostly just nodes for Warcry speed and some damage when we Warcry, things like that. So when we weapon swap, we then have the totem stuff going on. So we've got some increased skill effect duration, so our totems stay up longer. There's some totem stuff here so that they don't die as quickly. And then we've got +1 totem here and another +1 here. And then we're basically just using, the standard setup. I think this was originally from Skadoosh's Corrupting Cry Warbringer, which is a great build. You should check that out. And we're basically using Ancestral Warrior Totem, which is linked to Earth Shatter. These totems create fissures, which we can then explode using our Warcries for more damage. And that's pretty much it. So other than that, in this build, obviously because we don't have elemental resistances, we're looking to mitigate damage in another way if possible. So one of the things that we're using is Blasphemy. Now, Blasphemy is linked to Temporal Chains and Enfeeble, and right now we only have a maximum of 1 curse because we haven't actually made it all the way up to the top side of the tree yet, but we're passing all the way up here, and all of these nodes, on any other build it would feel really wasted to just grab all of these nodes, but since we're stacking strength, this is kind of fine. All of the jewels also have flat strength and other modifiers in there as well. And we're making our way all the way up here where we're going to grab Whispers of Doom, which will then enable both of those curses at the same time. So we'll be able to slow monsters down with temporal chains, and then also make them deal less damage as well. So that's kind of a nice defensive layer there. But that is only for monsters that are very close to us. Once we actually have a 5-link here in this setup, I'll be able to increase the area of effects of those curses a little bit more, so it's covering a wider area. But as I said, for now, I don't even have a 5-link on Seismic Cry. I don't have any currency, so that's maybe something for the future. And that's pretty much it, really, for this build. I just wanted to discuss it in this video because I thought it was a really interesting idea to actually try and push this into endgame to see exactly how it was going to feel, you know, as we progress maps and we get deeper and deeper into the Atlas. What's it going to feel like having no resistances? Well, based on how it's been going so far, you know, I've noticed monsters have been starting to really chunk me with some of those hits. I'm currently in sort of the middle of yellow maps right now, you know, tier 8 maps, tier 7 maps, that sort of thing. So I think as I approach red maps and push into the end of red maps, I can expect to start to almost die to hits. Maybe I'll have enough life to just, you know, tank everything unless I get shotgunned, but that's something that I'm going to find out as I'm going to be progressing this character a little bit more and seeing what happens. But overall, I thought this was a pretty interesting experiment to do. I do think the Veil of the Night is a much better item in PoE 2, but that doesn't really mean much because in PoE 1 it was absolutely awful. You know, nobody would ever use it because it was so bad. So quite an interesting item overall, I think, and something that you could use early on in the league in this type of build to be able to completely ignore some stats on gear and just focus on others. Interesting concept. Let me know what you guys think of this. Maybe you've checked this item out and used it in a build or something. Let me know by commenting below. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.